So, because you mentioned the media and like, as we said, the COVID whistleblower from Wuhan, Fang Bing, was a Falun Gong practitioner. I didn't know about that until I looked at your report this week.
Yeah, I actually went and did a Google search for Fang Bing Falun Gong because I was like, is that true? I haven't seen that anywhere.
And it's interesting that never got mentioned. And so, let's talk about a few of these media companies that have ties to China.
Well, I think we talked to about New York Times last time you were on, and some of the reasons that they may not want to report on.
And their largest stakeholder is Carlos Slim, who's a Mexican billionaire who has very big, I think, automotive business interests in China.
But I think
you've got Washington Post with Jeff Bezos, who's getting all the Amazon products from China.
Yeah. Well, Amazon did this weird publishing deal with like the Chinese state-run publisher, where they made a website to sell like Xi Jinping's books.
Or like you can't leave bad reviews for Xi Jinping's book.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why you'd want to leave a bad review. I mean, it's such a well-written piece of work. I mean, I don't see how anyone could not like the governance of China. Just saying.
Personally written by Xi Jinping.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Anyway, so Amazon's got some weird stuff going on.
Right. But all the media companies, like the biggest media companies have business. NBC has their broadcast contract with China and, no doubt.
The Olympics.
Right.
I mean, we had a group in Australia who were, just a group of volunteers, exposed to persecution in Australia. And they went to the media, and this was in the run-up before the 2008 Olympics. And at least one of the companies was honest enough to say, sorry, I can't cover you. Otherwise, we don't get to go to Beijing in a few months. And they just came right out and said it. But it's an obvious dynamic that's at work. And it's unfortunate because it's done a lot of damage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the damage is that, like, we are having a podcast where you essentially at the beginning kind of explained what Falun Gong is in a way that no one is like, what's a Tibetan, or like what's a Uyghur, or what's a Hong Konger?
What's democracy in Hong Kong?
Some people don't know who the Uyghurs are, but
But the Tibetans have done, like the Tibetans, people got it because there was a lot of coverage, at least in the 90s, of like Tibetans and like I
think the Dalai Lama had kind of a celebrity status that helped a lot.
Richard Gere didn't hurt.
Yes, that too. Yeah.
So how do you make Falun Gong cool so that everyone is like, yeah, like that's awesome. Like I don't want to practice Falun Gong, but that's a cool thing, and I want to like have my hashtag.
I feel like whenever you try to make something cool, it doesn't work. Does it?
You mean personally me when I try to make that is true.
No,
that
I just meant in
true.
general, but I see how that sounds now. But I just meant in general because the opposite of cool is trying to make things cool.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, So maybe don't make a suggestion.
I don't know, Levi. Was there a question that you can answer there?
Is he asking if I'm cool? I don't.
I don't know where this podcast is going anymore. Usually, when Chris is here, we start to run off the rails close to the end of the podcast.
All right. Here we go.
Okay, here we go. Actually, one of the things I was going to ask about is you had mentioned them going after mayors, or just it is insane to me to think that one of the examples in your report of transnational repression was literally the Chinese consulate going after a Christmas parade in Perth, Australia, and trying to get like Falun Gong banned from participating in a Christmas parade. And it seems so petty. You can't imagine the US government going to another country and going to like the specific city community parade and being like, oh, sorry, you can't have a free Julian Assange, poster in this parade or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it just seems like, I don't know where I was going with that, but
and I think what's deceptive about it is you sort of think like, okay, it's a Christmas parade. This doesn't have any material impact on anything. But if you look at it in the aggregate, and I think that's what's so telling about a story like that. If they'll go after something so small and so petty, well, do you think that's the only thing you're going after? No, that's just a tiny, tiny piece of a huge puzzle. And that, so if you look at it in the aggregate, it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of silencing and marginalizing Falun Gong. Those are the two twin goals. Because again, coming back to the idea that this is the community that years before most other people on the international stage was saying, wait a minute, this CCP is really evil. You guys don't get it. This is really bad. And these are their crimes and this is what they're doing. And so...
Well, we got it in 1989 and then we forgot it.
Well, sort of. But it was sort of, I think you have to, when you look at something like the Christmas parade, you have to think of the aggregate, because the aggregate is the reality. It's happening in every city in America, and it has for 20 years. And that has, in aggregate, that has a real effect at keeping Falun Gong sort of off to the sidelines. It's not something people talk about. And if they're not going to talk about it, it's not on anybody's radar. There's no impetus to do anything about it. And that's exactly where the CCP wants the Falun Gong story to be.
Yeah, and as soon as the CCP gives us a little bit of money, like, we're not going to have you on the show again.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear. You do this every week?
Yeah. I know.
When you say this and you looked at Shelley, did you mean...
I think he meant deal with Matt every week.
Yeah.
That's what I feared was the...
That's why you're in the middle, right?
Yeah, I'm in the middle, so Chris can annoy me on one side and Matt can annoy me on the other side. I was going to ask actually about, because one thing I noticed this year and last year is that the U.S. State Department, like the U.S. government, actually sanctioned some officials for persecuting Falun Gong, and I do not remember seeing that before.
Yeah, that's entirely new. There were two. The Trump administration sanctioned somebody because they persecuted Falun Gong, and then the Biden administration, earlier, sanctioned not just anybody this time that was persecuting Falun Gong, but somebody who was part of the 610 office. That the agency we talked about that's specifically targeting Falun Gong, which is huge because officially the 610 office still kind of doesn't exist. That's the official line of the CCP, and so to sanction that individual was also an acknowledgement that said, hey, CCP, we understand that this office exists. And we understand, the mission of that office. So that was huge from sort of a diplomatic standpoint. I think what most people miss is how big it is inside China. Because, we talked about these tens of millions of people who are getting persecution reports out of China so that, people can know what's going on in China. Well, the information goes the other way too. Those leaflets that people were printing out, well, they get a lot of that information from overseas human rights workers. The history of the CCP and stuff like that, but also news of, hey, this official in China was just sanctioned by the United States government. That goes on a leaflet, and suddenly it's on every doorstep in your village or your town or your city in China. And the reason that's so big is, first of all, they're like, that's a clear acknowledgement the United States stands on the side of Falun Gong, not the CCP. That's big in and of itself. But what may be bigger is that a lot of the folks in China have some hope to get out of China, including a lot of police chiefs and those folks. They want their kid to go to college here. They want something. And those sanctions prevent you from traveling, prevent you from having money out here. Suddenly, everybody's scared that, oh, they're next, or they're going to get on some list that the United States government has. And so we actually saw a lot of reverberations around the China where people were like literally coming to the Falun Gong people that they had detained and saying, I'll let you go if you don't tell them I did this. Or people who are trying to move their position, like this is the part of the department, the police department, the unit in the police department that goes after Falun Gong. Oh, I work over here. I don't work on that unit. I work over here. And they're changing their titles and they're changing. A lot of that was going on in China for both sanctions. And this is something we fed back to the State Department, because they didn't even think of that. They're sort of thinking this is an international, it's mainly an international thing. It's not. It has huge ripple effects and real tangible material difference inside China.
That's really interesting.
Wow, that's actually really positive to hear.
Yeah. No, I was going to ask if the sanctions were a sign that like some of that, the thing that we were talking about, Falun Gong getting shunted off to the sidelines was reversing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I think it definitely plays a role in that. But the bigger manifestation is people going, uh-oh, I'm next.
Yeah. And now that people in China, we just did an episode about Runshui, the run philosophy, where it's like people are now talking openly about like getting out of China and how they can get out. And it comes at a time when the Communist Party is increasingly cracking down on issuing passports or doing things like confiscating passports, and using COVID as an excuse why people can't leave. So
well, I mean, this is one of the things. This is a part of the report where we sort of take a look ahead and sort of things to look at. And I think we're starting to see some troubling things in China, right? All the mortgages going up in flames, and all these protests in the banks, and all this kind of stuff. And things aren't looking good. Things have never looked great, but things are looking. I mean,
the Communist Party is really good at like duct taping all these things together and like just like smoothing it over, because every time in the last 15 years that I've been following China, like you always think this is going to be the thing that takes them down, but it's never the thing, because they're really good. Like you say Falun Gong has conviction, but the Communist Party has conviction too. And they know how to like really just move forward and duct tape up over the cracks and bail out the boat. And
perhaps, but at some point they might run out of duct tape, or the sheer physics of the colossal thing they're taping just might fall to various degrees. I mean, maybe not the whole country, but the thing we were pointing out is that the worse things get in China, the worse it's going to be for Falun Gong, because again, they're the first people they're going to go after to make sure it doesn't get out. And if you combine that, and you see this in Hong Kong, is also in the Falun Gong community, there's a real conviction to stick around. Like a lot of the folks, you look over the last 2 years in Hong Kong, a lot of the media have left. There's a lot of people that have left, rightly so, understood. There is a contingent of Falun Gong that are staying put. And if the worst things get in China, it's probably going to be the same thing. They're going to stay put, and they're going to tell us what's really going on. And by doing so, they're really putting themselves in harm's way, even greater than they are now. And that's something to sort of keep our eye on. If some of the cards start to fall in China, it could get really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about Hong Kong, but we were running out of time, but I actually do kind of want to ask about this. I remember when we were walking in Hong Kong, 2019, and we saw that like Chinese auntie who was like wearing one of those yellow like outfits that Falun Gong practitioners wear, like in a parade and stuff. And she was in one of the walkways, like the raised walkways.
Oh, she had a bunch of, she was passing out like flyers or something.
Yeah. And then like the Hong Kong police, and this is 2019 before the repression got really bad. And like they came and harassed her.
But it was also like the most politically sensitive day. It was October 1st. So it was the anniversary of.
Sorry, is this post-security law or
this is pre?
This
is back when we were allowed to go to Hong Kong.
And so there was going to be a big parade and protest later that day. But like meanwhile, there was just this auntie who she looked there. There was like the rest of this walkway was completely deserted. Just her and like 20 cops in like riot gear.
And they like come up to her and they start harassing her. And I'm like, this is bad.
But it just felt like she was just there because she's always there on the weekend or something like that.
She didn't even know like what the October 1st date thing was like.
But like it was, I remember that because the police were awful.
Yeah. So, but like,
and then they yelled at us for being on the walkway too.
Yeah. I don't remember if I got footage of that. But anyway, I remember that because, so the last 2 years, you have this national security law. Because one of the things that was like different about Hong Kong versus China is that in Hong Kong, you could practice Falun Gong or you could have, anything, right? And we'd be okay. Whereas you go over to the border to mainland China and they arrest you, detain you, to kill you for your organs, whatever. Hong Kong didn't have that. But now with the national security law, like they're going after people who held up blank white pieces of paper in protest, right? Like what are they doing now to Falun Gong in Hong Kong? Like how's that changed since the national security law?
It's difficult to say, and this is where I don't want to try and read the tea leaves about who's really. I mean, as you guys are well aware, there's several factions in the CCP, and they're always fighting with each other. And which one has the upper hand in Hong Kong at any given time? It's hard to tell. It is interesting to note that, as you said, for many years, Falun Gong relatively free. They couldn't maybe rent a theater for a conference or something, but relatively free in Hong Kong. That's interesting, even though it's technically under the jurisdiction of the CCP. What we've seen is sort of isolated incidents where, again, like a lady was beaten up with a baseball bat. people are threatened, death threats, information booths. Someone comes in and just destroys their information booths. These little ladies, they're handing out leaflets and stuff like that. But by and large, the Falun Gong community has stayed. And it's not like they've all just disappeared. They pulled them over to the border, and put them in a prison in Beijing, which the national security law would authorize them to do. And that hasn't happened yet. Why exactly? Honestly, I couldn't tell you. Because again, it's very tough to tell which of the factions is really kind of ruling the day on what's going to happen in Hong Kong. Hard to tell.
All right. Well, so let's end this podcast on some good news. I don't have any. Do you have any good news?
Some good news. Well, I think some relatively good news. Over the last few years, particularly after the China Tribunal happened in London a few years ago, where they brought all those witnesses forward and said, okay, yeah, this organ harvesting thing is real. It's been happening on a significant scale and all that. You do start to see, first of all, a lot more coverage in the media, relatively speaking, but also now real laws being put forth. And even in the United States, and that was a big one. They haven't passed it yet, but there is a Forced Organ Harvesting Act before this Congress that has real teeth. I mean, everything else in the past related to Falun Gong, at least, has been sort of proclamation and sort of statements of where the government stands.
Like House resolutions, I've seen.
Yeah, House resolutions, right? But nothing with real teeth that's actionable law. And this has that. And I think other countries, some have already passed those laws, other countries are pondering them. And so as more countries start to pass these laws to curtail the practice, that could actually have a real impact on decreasing and hopefully one day eliminating this practice of killing people for their organs in China. So that's kind of hopeful on the international stage.
Well, that would be a good start.
Yeah.
Not killing people for their organs. All right. Well, that's really the message of hope that we need. So if you could just slide over, in a really cool way, like slide over the booklet there.
Oh, not me.
No, I was just going to hold this up. Thank you for joining us, Levi. The book is called Pandemic, Persecution, and Pushback, and you can get it at
FalunGongReport.org.
All right. We'll put a link to that below.
Can you read it online? Is that
you can read the whole thing online? Yeah.
So you don't even have to pay for it.
You don't have to pay for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, honestly, like you Falun Gong people are really bad at making money. It's for free online, which is actually how I read it too. But yeah.
Wait a minute, Matt didn't even pay for a copy.
I'm not going to pay for a copy. What do you think?